because I start out with the Platonic ideal of beauty. And with a quote, short quote from a long poem by Hilda Doolittle, a poet who was analyzed by Freud and whose book, Homage to Freud, gives a wonderful description of how it was to be analyzed by Freud. And she based it on a diary that she kept every day of her analysis. So, this is the poem. Fair, 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 do we deserve beauty? Pure, pure fire, do we dare follow desire where you show perfection? What is beautiful? Why does it matter? Plato equated beauty with truth as being the highest good. Beauty is power. It's something everyone yearns to have either in oneself or in another person whom we love, or both. But the idea of beauty is intimately related to attitudes towards masculinity and femininity. What is beautiful is different for a man than for a woman. The concept of the beautiful in images of women is interesting to me as it relates to the problem of women I see in treatment, also men. Women are affected by the images of beauty they're exposed to. Each society has its standards of beauty, and we're all exposed to the versions of beauty presented in works of art, advertising, and media. Art serves as a propaganda medium in that sense. It shows us what to admire. Western art shows many faces of what is beautiful. Many advertisements use a beautiful face of a young woman as an attention-getting device, even when the product that they're selling has nothing to do with the female face. Clothes are shown on young women with beautiful faces, even though no one rationally thinks the clothes will make their owner's face beautiful. Or their body either, for that matter. Cars are shown with a young woman standing alongside, even though it is understood that the car does not come with a beautiful young woman. But the image feeds the idea that a beautiful young woman will be attracted to the man with the beautiful car. The desire for the young woman is associated with the image of the car, and a man buys it. Beauty is power. No one expects that a beautiful young man will provide such an image of desire for a young woman and tempt her to buy a car. Why does a beautiful woman sell cars? The fantasy of being loved by a beautiful woman has ultimate power, transferring the loving from the woman to the car, from the inaccessible to the accessible, from the ideal to the mundane works. Beauty and female desire. In the fragment of Doolittle's poem above, the poet describes her dilemma as to whether to dare to desire the beauty of a young woman dancer. The poet was bisexual and was encouraged by Freud to continue to be so. Why should she need to have courage to do that? Partly it may have to do with the idea that longing for the mother is the basis for female homosexuality. De Laurentiis is the reference there. To long for such beauty is to long for the love of a woman. I want to suggest that the mother's face is the primordial beauty, and that desire for that beauty becomes taboo when the infant becomes an Oedipal child and remains taboo for both boys and girls forever after. But for girls, there's the double taboo that I don't intend to prove it, I don't think you can, but it's an assertion anyway. but merely to assert that thinking of beauty in this way can be helpful in doing clinical work with women or men whose ideas and fantasies about beauty inhibit their functioning and prevent their finding satisfaction in their lives. I want to focus on the face as the beautiful, the face as the prototype of beauty. If Plato was right and beauty is an absolute, not contingent on circumstances, he was talking about a psychological bedrock. And that bedrock, I believe, is the image that the baby is born prepared to see. That image is the image of a mother's interested face. Every baby needs that to survive. And psychologists, there's a long list of them here, have shown that newborns can distinguish an oval shape within hours of birth, the shape of the mother's face. They look at it in preference to square, triangular, or other shapes. Corresponding to Plato's idea of an absolute beauty, the shape of a human face is preferred from birth by the human infant. Furthermore, infants show the same preference for attractive faces as do adults. Many references again, it's all. They prefer faces that approach the average for the size of features, shape, and size of the face itself. As Lewis notes, it is in the evolutionary interest of the infant to engage with the mother, who will protect and nurture her. Being born prepared to do this is in the infant's own interest, as well as that of the species. Of course, the infant relates to the mother through hearing, through smell, and through proprioception, as well as through sight. All of the senses are involved in bonding, but here I want to limit the consideration to only one of the senses involved, sight. As Sinkman put it, psychodynamic understanding is that concepts of beauty originate in the first relationship of life. As Melanie Klein posited, the good mother is the mother who is present. The bad mother is the one who is absent, whether physically or psychologically. The good mother is the one who looks at her infant, makes eye contact, and sees her face to face. The look of attention and caring is what makes the mother's face so important to the infant. Support for this idea comes from a study of eye contact in infants. According to the authors of this study, quote, "Here we show in a prospective longitudinal study that infants later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders exhibit a mean decline in eye fixation from 2 to 6 months of age, a pattern not observed in infants who do not develop that. These observations mark the earliest known indicators of social disability in infancy, but also falsify a prior hypothesis in the first months of life. This basic mechanism of social adaptive action, eye looking, is not immediately diminished in infants later diagnosed with ASD. Instead, eye looking appears to begin at normative levels prior to decline. The finding that eye contact is important in infancy and that it starts out at a measurable level in all infants shows a genetic predisposition to look at the mother and the mother's face, which when continued leads to social awareness and competence and makes the case for the infant's predisposition to look at shapes similar to the mother's face as a genetic advantage that would exist in all human populations. An experiment by René Spitz suggests a further refinement of this preference. Spitz found that when he loomed over the cribs of infants in an orphanage, they cried. But when he covered his forehead, lowering the hairline to that of a female, the infants accepted him without crying. The male face was a threat, while a female face was interesting. The babies he looked at were older than those in the previous studies, but his finding supports the idea that the beauty of the mother's female face is primal. Sorry, Melanie Klein, it wasn't really the breast after all. Ainsworth, Bowlby, Shore, and others showed how the mother's absence could cause infant development to slow down and regression to set in. Overgeneralizations of their findings led to advice to mothers to give up their careers and stay home to be with their children full time, which led to a discontented and sometimes depressed mothers who were emotionally unavailable to their infants, which led to the disillusionment with their original findings. But the idea that infants need contact with their mothers for at least part of their day, which was the original finding, does seem robust. Eye contact and face-to-face interaction with the mother does lead to normal development of social intelligence as well as physical development. So looking at mother is very important to what the infant does and for feeling contentment when allowed to do that. And that would provide the prototype for the pleasure afforded by seeing beauty. And I have a section here on beauty and art that I will skip because I hope we have time for discussion. So we'll go to beauty as a social value. But anyway, the art part is that many artists have depicted the female face as the ultimate in beauty. Okay, so beauty as a social value. Women want to be beautiful. We want to be attractive to others, to use our beauty as a source of pride and our gender as a source of identity. We experience our faces and our bodies as beautiful or not beautiful as we wish to be, or not as beautiful as we wish to be. As Les was saying about the body, it's never neutral. Social values echo this and spread to little girls. Wanting to be beautiful is something we inculcate as a feminine value. But beauty is a source of power. Why shouldn't anyone want that power when she is little and weak? Wanting to be beautiful is considered normal for girls in our society. We can see that beauty is something our female patients and even a few male patients have conflicts about. The idea of beauty is taboo for boys in our society. Boys are to have the power of brains and brawn. This makes for gender trouble for girls who are or want to be brainy, masculine, or unbeautiful, just as it makes for gender trouble for boys who are or want to be beautiful. And in a woman who wants a beautiful man, gender trouble can be doubly conflict-laden. Or it may be that the man longs to be or even believes that he is a beautiful woman, again leading to gender trouble. Okay. A description of how a woman turns the beauty of the mother's face into the beauty that wins social notice and approval comes from a memoir written by her daughter. Volk describes her mother putting on makeup, quote, "She is satisfied when her face is all one color, including her lips. This is the moment she stops looking like my mother." After describing the application on top of this blank of rouge, eye makeup, and lipstick, the daughter remarks, quote, "My mother has painted a portrait of her face on top of her face," unquote. Here we have the woman masquerading as a woman. An artificial face, a mask over the natural face. The artificial face signals to the world that this woman wants to be feminine and beautiful. It's not just that she was born that way. She goes to great trouble to make that happen. Why not just show the naturally beautiful face? Why construct a mask over it? Could it be that the naturally beautiful face would frighten the viewer because it is like the Medusa, too exciting to be born? Could the artificial face reassure the viewer that she could be as beautiful as the masked woman if only she put on a mask of her own, thus deflecting envy? The daughter in this book says, quote, "I will never, ever wear makeup, Ma," unquote. Does this mean she will not compete, will not rival her mother's beauty? Grown into a career as an author, depicts herself as clever, creative, but never beautiful. Her book is about how she freed herself from feeling defective and disloyal to her mother by idealizing another woman, the author and designer Schiaparelli, a woman who was not beautiful herself, but made a successful career of making other women attractive, and wrote a book about it that the daughter believes freed her to be the writer she eventually became. Here, the beauty of the mother's face is uncanny, frightening even, when she has put on her mask to face the world. She is getting ready to ignore the child. She is no longer the longed-for, intensely attentive mother. When the mother wants to encourage her daughter to identify with her and make herself a woman who fascinates others, the daughter is mourning the loss of her own mother. She can only make contact with her as the mother who paid attention to her daughter by remembering and creating that mother in her own mind. Although this was not written by a patient, it shows the insight a girl uses in dealing with the beauty of the mother's face and the relative success of that way of coping with her ambivalence about her mother's beautiful face, her mother's maternal beauty. Okay. Now, in discussing the idea of beauty in a man, I will present case material. Is the idea of the beauty's face useful only with female patients? I think it may be useful with men as well. This case is that of a man who I saw first in my waiting room when he came in for a consultation. I had an experience that I can only describe with the cliche that I gasped. He was so beautiful that I thought of a Greek god. I had a hard time listening to him objectively as I stared at him while he described his problem to me. He was bothered by being unsure of what he wanted to do with his life and unable to find anyone to have a relationship with. As he described it, he came from a large and very accomplished family. His relatives cared for him very much. They supported him both financially and emotionally. But he could not find any satisfaction in his life. He did not believe himself worthy of all they did for him. He struggled with depression. He had managed to graduate from college after 6 years, but his degree in English literature did not give him confidence that he could do any job other than being, as he was, a taxi cab driver. While his history contained some traumas like frequent moves in his early childhood, teasing by his siblings, loss of attention and care by his parents at times because of their very busy lives with too many commitments and losses of beloved grandparents, nothing seemed to account for the extent of his lack of self-esteem and his inability to achieve anything. A consultation with a colleague, Dr. Paulina Kernberg, yielded a new pathway to understanding him. Well, as you can see, I was having trouble, and luckily I was smart enough to get a consultation. What was most important in his life was his handicap. What had struck me at first, his beauty. What had held him back from seeing that as a handicap was my countertransference, a mixture of envy, desire, and shame at these unprofessional feelings. As soon as I opened the topic by saying that I noticed his unusual looks the first time we met, he began to talk about his deep shame about what he called being too pretty. He was different from all of his other siblings. People would remark about it since he could remember. He was always called the beautiful one. Strangers would stop his mother on the street and remark about his beauty while ignoring the other children with them. As he grew up, strangers would stare, and later some men and some women would make passes at him. He experienced all of this as shameful. He hated being singled out. He hated being forced into sex. He worried about how his friends and siblings felt when these incidents happened while he was with them. As we talked about how he felt intruded on by the adults who talked about his looks, I asked him about how it felt when I was talking about his looks. He hated it. He wanted to talk about anything else. When I asked about that, I was just like those predators, prying into his life. What I intended by asking about his feelings was getting him to understand himself as motivated from within, rather than just as an object of other people's gaze. And of course, feminist thinking led me to see that, the other person's gaze, as very important. The discussion of his beauty as a handicap seemed to free him from the shame he felt at being objectified and therefore passive. As we understood it together, his beauty made him like a woman, like those women who experience themselves as the object of men's desire rather than as having their own desire. The importance of this was underscored when later in his treatment he was able to establish himself in a career as an English teacher and marry a very accomplished woman. His mother-in-law gave him a birthday party, to which she invited her own children, their spouses, his siblings and their spouses, and his parents. It was a big, big party. At the end of the dinner, she brought out a birthday cake and said, "This is for the most beautiful member of our family." She was objectifying him in front of all the people he cared for, which caused him the same old shame he had experienced so many times before. Now he was able to talk about it with me, so it did not isolate him from everyone else as it had before. Now he had a witness to his feelings. He talked about the envy her remark had to have aroused in his wife and the other people, especially the women seated around the table. He talked about how awful it was to be envied. He cried in the session when he told me about it and laughed after we talked about how clueless she was and how silly she had probably seemed to the rest of the family. A year after the treatment ended, he sent me a note of thanks with a picture of him with his wife and then 2 children, with the inscription on the back that said, "Now I am no longer the most beautiful one." At the time of the treatment, I did not see or examine the way in which his beauty made him feel like he was less manly, because beauty is what belongs to the mother and the mother's face. I think that understanding the objectification in this way might have helped him to understand his own shame better. I also think that the case illustrates the imperfection of treatment and how we learn from that imperfection so that we can later see in better focus. Applying the idea of the beauty of the mother's face may be useful with both men and women patients. Discussion. And I think I will skip most of the discussion. And go on to this. Pacteau, following Freud, Lacan, and Anjou, asserts that in normal male development, quote, "the fascination which female dress holds for the man may draw some of its strength from his desire to repossess the once commonly held maternal skin, a desire overdetermined by the historic renunciation, but not initially derived from it. Henceforth, while he may not reenact the wearing of the maternal skin, the man may nevertheless derive a vicarious comfort in his proximity to and identification with the woman who possesses it." Unquote. I add to Pacteau's point of view the idea that the man who possesses a beautiful woman gets satisfaction both from the identification with the beauty of the mother and from the assurance that he is attractive in other ways so that he can win such a woman. Finstock argued that heterosexual love allowed each member of the couple to enjoy imagining the pleasure of the other person and thus vicariously being of the other sex. His idea includes the idea that the man enjoying possessing the beauty of the woman. In this way, a little boy or grown man who dresses as a woman is expressing something like that everyone feels, a wish to return to the comfort of being part of a mother-baby pair in which the baby feels protected by its closeness to the mother. The man who chooses a beautifully dressed and made-up woman is expressing that same wish. Hair, makeup, and grooming all accentuate the woman's femininity in one kind of beauty. The same features in an androgynous pattern enhances the male's ability to identify with the gamin woman. Beauty is frightening as well as being pleasurable. Octavio Paz remarks, evil, to be beautiful, must be absolute and feminine, unquote. The idea of feminine beauty associated with evil has been the subject of myths and legends. One common thread that runs through tales from many cultures is that of the beautiful princess. No culture has myths of the ugly princess, or even the plain one. Being a beautiful princess is part of many little girls' dream of growing up to look like mother. Feminist mothers often feel very alienated when their little girls want to wear pink party dresses and look very girly, even though mother dresses in jeans or overalls. Being a beautiful princess is part of the dream. It's part of the aspiration to have a gender identity that is stable and satisfying. And the little girl at that age is working on that. It assures the little girl that she is valuable for who she is as a girl and will grow up to be even more valuable when she becomes a fertile woman, capable of being a beautiful mother whose baby will search for her face, her eyes, her attention, her love. The mother's face, and especially her eyes, are the template for beauty that Plato hypothesized. Thank you.